servicios y proyectos eficientes, confiables y flexibles, gracias a un equipo que genera valor y relaciones sólidas con nuestros clientes, colaboradores y grupos de interés a largo plazo.
Tal como la conocemos tiene tres estados: el estado sólido como en un glaciar congelado, el estado líquido como en este vaso alargado y el estado gaseoso como en una nube con forma de helado. Y hoy queremos proponerte que existe un nuevo estado, el estado consciente, así lo hemos llamado. Se trata de nosotros mismos, cuando nos damos cuenta de que estamos hechos de agua y tenemos conciencia que del agua depende nuestra existencia y la de toda la vida en la tierra y su descendencia. Súmate al estado consciente del agua, seamos aliados y cuidémosla en todos sus estados.
El Instituto de Ecología y Biodiversidad, IEB, es un centro dedicado a la investigación científica de excelencia, su comunicación y transferencia hacia la sociedad. Creado en 2006, realizamos ciencia de vanguardia a nivel mundial que contribuye a entender la vida en el planeta y a la sustentabilidad de nuestro país. Publicamos artículos en revistas especializadas, contribuimos al desarrollo de políticas públicas sobre conservación de la naturaleza. Apoyamos a los sectores público y privado, creamos libros y otros materiales educativos y estamos presentes en los medios de comunicación con evidencia científica sólida para informar a la ciudadanía sobre El IEB cuenta con 4 programas de investigación principales y programas integrativos. Los programas de investigación son Estatus y tendencias de la biodiversidad, Ecosistemas y contribuciones de la naturaleza a las personas, Agentes de cambio de la biodiversidad y Conservación y bienestar humano. Los programas integrativos buscan llevar a la práctica y a la toma de decisiones la investigación que desarrollamos. Estos son el programa Biodata, la red de estudios socioecológicos de largo plazo, el programa de conservación en agroecosistemas y el laboratorio de invasiones biológicas. Además, contamos con las unidades de administración y finanzas, comunicaciones y transferencia que brindan apoyo profesional a nuestras y nuestros científicos y estudiantes. Somos una red descentralizada de investigadores e investigadoras que pertenecen a prestigiosas universidades a lo largo de Chile. Además, para mejorar la infraestructura de apoyo a la investigación científica, el IEB sustenta estaciones biológicas, donde realizamos investigación de campo y apoyamos la educación y desarrollo sustentable de las comunidades del territorio. Conoce nuestro trabajo siguiéndonos en redes sociales, visitando nuestra página web y suscribiéndote a nuestro boletín mensual.
EcoGen es una plataforma genética de monitoreo no invasivo que permite generar impactos ambientales positivos sobre las especies en cualquier ecosistema. Analizamos la huella genética que dejan los animales mediante la colecta de una muestra de agua, suelo o sedimento para monitorear e identificar las especies sin observarlas ni dañarlas, permitiendo registrar con alta precisión y sensibilidad la presencia de organismos en su medio ambiente, al mismo tiempo que evitamos la pérdida de biodiversidad y cuidamos la naturaleza de los efectos del cambio climático. Si no conocemos, no podemos proteger. Te invitamos a invertir en conservación y hacer visible la biodiversidad invisible.
El futuro de las empresas es la sustentabilidad y eficiencia en sus operaciones productivas. Ese es nuestro negocio y en lo que somos expertos. En Biodiversa entregamos soluciones integrales, innovadoras y confiables para los desafíos de sustentabilidad de nuestros clientes, generando una plataforma de servicio en agua, residuos y proyectos. Gestión de biosólidos. Valorizamos tus residuos para convertirlos en activos. Hemos desarrollado importantes avances en el manejo integral de lodos provenientes del saneamiento urbano y de la agroindustria, con exitosas experiencias en la aplicación benéfica de biosólidos en predios agrícolas y forestales. Entregamos un servicio ajustado a los requerimientos de nuestros clientes y entorno, con el fin de entregar una solución confiable y responsable con el medio ambiente y las comunidades vecinas. Laboratorio Ambiental, especialistas en el análisis y monitoreo de aguas. El laboratorio de Biodiversa es uno de los más importantes del país, con un alto estándar de calidad y profesionales expertos en el área, orientando y satisfaciendo las necesidades de cada uno de nuestros clientes. Estamos en gran parte del país, con una extensa red de muestreo y laboratorios certificados, con acreditaciones en el muestreo, análisis y monitoreo de parámetros físico-químicos de aguas residuales y como entidad técnica de fiscalización ambiental, lo que nos permite entregar un servicio oportuno y acorde con las exigencias, normativas y estándares requeridos. Gracias al desarrollo de tecnología e innovación, garantizamos la trazabilidad de nuestro servicio. De esta forma, entregamos a nuestros clientes resultados confiables para el desarrollo de sus operaciones productivas de acuerdo a la normativa vigente. Proyectos y manejo de riles, soluciones integrales, eficientes y ambientalmente seguras. Un servicio ajustado a las necesidades de nuestros clientes para el manejo de los residuos líquidos derivados de su actividad industrial. Importantes empresas respaldan nuestra experiencia y han confiado en nuestra gestión para abordar sus necesidades de sustentabilidad, desarrollando servicios y proyectos eficientes, confiables y flexibles, gracias a un equipo que genera valor y relaciones sólidas con nuestros clientes, colaboradores y grupos de interés a largo plazo.
El agua tal como la conocemos tiene tres estados: el estado sólido como en un glaciar congelado, el estado líquido como en este vaso alargado y el estado gaseoso como en una nube con forma de helado. Y hoy queremos proponerte que exista un nuevo estado, el estado estado consciente, así lo hemos llamado. Se trata de nosotros mismos, cuando nos damos cuenta de que estamos hechos de agua y tenemos conciencia que del agua depende nuestra existencia y la de toda la vida en la tierra y su descendencia. Súmate al estado consciente del agua. Seamos aliados y cuidémosla en todos sus estados.
El Instituto de Ecología y Biodiversidad, IEB, es un centro dedicado a la investigación científica de excelencia, su comunicación y transferencia hacia la sociedad. Creado en 2006, realizamos ciencia de vanguardia a nivel mundial que contribuye a entender la vida en el planeta y a la sustentabilidad de nuestro país. Publicamos artículos en revistas especializadas, contribuimos al desarrollo de políticas públicas sobre conservación de la naturaleza. Apoyamos a los sectores público y privado, creamos libros y otros materiales educativos y estamos presentes en los medios de comunicación con evidencia científica sólida para informar a la ciudadanía sobre nuestros invaluables ecosistemas. El IEB cuenta con 4 programas de investigación principales y programas integrativos. Los programas de investigación son Estatus y tendencias de la biodiversidad, Ecosistemas y contribuciones de la naturaleza a las personas, Agentes de cambio de la biodiversidad y Conservación y bienestar humano. Los programas integrativos buscan llevar a la práctica y a la toma de decisiones la investigación que desarrollamos. Estos son el programa Biodata, la red de estudios socioecológicos de largo plazo, el programa de conservación en agroecosistemas y el laboratorio de invasiones biológicas. Además, contamos con las unidades de administración y finanzas, comunicaciones y transferencia, que brindan apoyo profesional a nuestras y nuestros científicos y estudiantes. Somos una red descentralizada de investigadores e investigadoras que pertenecen a prestigiosas universidades a lo largo de Chile. Además, para mejorar la infraestructura de apoyo a la investigación científica, el IEB sustenta estaciones biológicas, donde realizamos investigación de campo y apoyamos la educación y desarrollo sustentable de las comunidades del territorio. Conoce nuestro trabajo siguiéndonos en redes sociales, visitando nuestra página web y suscribiéndote a nuestro boletín mensual.
GEN es una plataforma genética de monitoreo no invasivo que permite generar impactos ambientales positivos sobre las especies en cualquier ecosistema. Analizamos la huella genética que dejan los animales mediante la colecta de una muestra de agua, suelo o sedimento para monitorear e identificar las especies sin observarlas ni dañarlas, permitiendo registrar con alta precisión y sensibilidad la presencia de organismos
¿Aló?
al
Hola,
mismo tiempo
¿se escucha?
que evitamos la pérdida de
Hola, ¿sí?
biodiversidad y cuidamos la naturaleza de los efectos del cambio climático. Si no conocemos,
Un, dos, tres, sí, ahora sí.
Muy buenas tardes. Vamos a retomar
Good afternoon. We'll
la
be
segunda sesión de este
welcoming
primer foro
everybody to the
internacional en
second session
conservación de la biodiversidad
of this forum.
y bienestar humano. Nuevamente agradecemos a
Again, we'd
las
like to
instituciones
thank
que patrocinan
institutions
este
that are
encuentro,
sponsoring
así como a las
this
empresas
forum, as well as
auspiciadoras
the sponsoring
y
companies
colaboradoras
and those
que
that are
están viendo
collaborating with
aquí
us as well,
en
which
la
you see
pantalla y
here on the
cuyo
screen,
apoyo ha sido
and whose support
fundamental
has been
para
key
hacer posible estas
to make
jornadas.
these
Agradecemos también la presencia de
instances
nuestras
possible. I'd
autoridades
also like to
que
thank
nos
the presence of
acompañan
our
y de los
authorities that are
invitados
here
e
and also of
invitadas
our
especiales.
guests.
En este segundo panel invitamos a
In the
reflexionar
second
sobre un
panel, we invite
aspecto
you to
decisivo
reflect on
para
the
el futuro
decisive
de nuestras
aspect to the
sociedades,
future of
la
our
forma
societies,
en que el
the
mundo
way in
público
which the
y
public
el sector
world
privado
and the private
reconocen,
sector
valoran y
acknowledge,
gestionan
value,
el
and
capital
manage
natural.
natural capital.
Este espacio reúne a
This space
representantes de
gathers
empresas,
representatives from
gobierno
companies,
y
the
academia
government, and
para
academia
explorar respuestas
explore
conjuntas desde la convicción
joint
de que no hay
answers from the
bienestar
conviction that
humano
there's no
sin
human well-being
biodiversidad
without there
sana,
being a
ni
healthy
desarrollo económico
biodiversity or
duradero sin capital natural
a natural
protegido.
capital as
Este
protected.
panel será moderado
This
por
will be
Constanza
moderated by Constanza
Pantaleón
Pantaleón
Segovia,
Segovia,
gerenta
who is
general
the
de
CEO
Acción
of Acción
Empresas,
Empresas,
a quien vamos a
who will
invitar muy luego.
welcome now. I will say something a bit about her. She is an industrial civil engineer from the University of Chile. More than 20 years experience in sustainability, strategy, and corporate strategy and public-private coordination. She has worked in national and international companies, in the public sector, and in trade associations, leading projects related to sustainability, innovation, and strategic management. I will leave now with you Constanza Pantaleón Segovia. Good afternoon. First, I would like to clarify, I'm from the Católica University, not say Chile. I'm gonna get killed if I don't say that. You know that there are some sort of little, well, I sort of made a master's in University of Chile, but I did study in both universities, but my original one is the Pontificia Catholic University of Chile. First, I would like to thank the university and obviously Campus Naturaleza for this invitation. I got the opportunity to listen to the talks in the morning, and this is a different space to talk about things we never really talk about. And in particular, I wanted to thank the invitation to moderate this panel because, in fact, this reflects on what us as an organization promote. For those who don't know us, Acción Empresas is a foundation whose main purpose is to promote sustainability in companies. So we work here and we have 116 members who are companies from different areas, different colors and shapes and interests. But our main focus is that one, to promote sustainability. We believe firmly in entrepreneurial sustainability in all levels of sustainability. I mean, all the areas have to be sustainable from the board director, sorry. And one of the things that characterizes us is on one side, innovation. We believe that without innovation, we are not able to adapt to the world we are in. And this kind of initiative is always calling upon us to innovate. And also in collaboration. No company, no area, neither academia or the entrepreneurial sector or the public sector or civil organizations on their own can solve or address problems or interests or needs such as the ones that we're talking about here. And I'm really happy to be moderating this panel, which contemplates an additional point of view from the public sector, the private sector, and academia, because in fact, this is the only way in which we'll be able to actually move towards the main goal we have all together. Having said that, I wanted to say Victor to talk because I think he's online. I don't know if he can hear us now. Victor? Victor Caro is the head of the Ministry of the Environment in Chile, the person of Campus capital. Hi, can you hear me? Because I have a very low volume from you guys. Can you hear me better now? Yes, I can hear a lot better. Okay, so you've been introduced. I don't know if you can see the screen. We are seeing now the presentation that I guess is the one you sent. Yeah, I wanted to see you guys. I can see you, but you see my presentation in the presenters mode, right? Not as in another presentation mode. Believe it or not, we tested this before. We got together to test it and it worked perfectly. Is it working now? No, Victor? Can you hear me now? Okay, so I'm on full screen now, sharing my full screen. Victor, we can show your presentation from here and we share our screen. Let me try again. Yeah, the computer didn't want to do it. Okay. So I've used a lot of my time already. Your camera's got a problem apparently. We see you like not well. Maybe you have a filter on. This is something red? Yes, like a pink blob we see. Yeah, you're not missing out on me not being there, really. Yeah, we can see your picture there. No, now we see your picture. But maybe it's better the picture to the pink blob. So, because of time, let's start with the presentation. Yeah. I'll try to tell you in 20 minutes some of my ideas that appeared from the work that we've been doing in the Ministry of the Environment and also in the Natural Capital Committee. So first I wanted to thank you guys for the invitation. For us, it's not just an honor and a pleasure to be here, but it's quite relevant to be part of this kind of activity. Moreover, with this panel, has been moderated by Constanza. We've met each other in many activities before. Also, Rodrigo was there too. And this system starts being consolidated because we now know each other's faces. And even though some people say it's a bad idea, I think it's a good idea because start becoming aware that we're actually part of something. Okay, so our agenda, I wanted to tell you our point of view. This is such a broad topic that I don't think we're going to be able to cover everything in a 20-minute long presentation, but some main concepts on what the problem might be that we identify in terms of the topic of the seminar. We wanted to also see the context on which these problems being developed, trying to find possible solutions and enabling situations, and with the public policies, just some of them, some that you may have heard of, but that are being discussed today because of the reality we're facing. So we're here in a great university, University of Concepción. I have to give a little bit of context to the conversation. And first of all, I want to talk about the problem. The loss of biodiversity is one of the most relevant problems that humanity is facing. But when we talk about the loss of biodiversity, we find this in a context that the UN agenda has set about the triple environmental crisis. The loss of biodiversity is also related to pollution and climate change. There is a relationship among them when you talk about a public policy or entrepreneurial company, because normally there's an effect on these areas. So they have to have a point of view that's only from the perspective of nature, but also has to incorporate different elements of the conversation. And from that, I want to take on the title of the session, which is Rewilding the Future, Transformative Strategies to Conserve and Restore Biodiversity. So this idea of future, I think it's not only interesting but necessary, in the sense that we have to find the causes that have led us to see this future as possible or not possible. And I would like to say that even though one of the main ones has to do with the consumption patterns and the production patterns that we have had so far in modern society, we know that Industrial Revolution onwards, we have had a way of developing economically that has been destructive based on fossil fuels that have led us to this triple crisis situation. Therefore, following this logic, the idea is to uncouple the pressures that we have in terms of environmental impact. And as long as we develop good public policies, and once we commit to this challenge, we can think that it's viable to move forward towards a sustainable road. Now, the question we make is that even if we have this scenario clear, if we know the need to uncouple these things, why can't we see it? Why can we actually take the point of view we need to? And in my opinion, I think that one of the problems that we face in this dimension of the world crisis is that we either have a bias, or we don't want to acknowledge, or we just don't see and don't perceive the scarcity, the emergency in terms of climate. Because most of us have to make a decision. It has to deal at a country level, but also at an internal level as well. In the morning, all of us, we open the tap and we get water. So actually, we're not able to perceive the problem and the whole dimension of the problem of the environment. And they have the bioprocrastination. We're not able to make decisions now. We make them for later, but we know if we don't make them now, it'll have an impact in the future, but we're unable to make that decision seriously when we need to and by the people who need to do it. Now, it's evident that this is a mistake, given that the lack of action has effects, material effects, effects on life. Globally, we say that within the first 2 decades of this 21st century, we generated more than 11,000 extreme meteorological phenomena, which cost 475,000 lives and $2.56 billion in loss. So not making decisions has a real cost, concrete and measurable. So how do we solve this? How do we move towards a solution? And it's likely that it sounds quite as an obvious answer of moving towards sustainability. Now, there's one thing on saying it and something different doing it. But when we want to see this challenge towards sustainable development, we know that it has a cost, and a cost that somebody has to pay. And it's a coordination cost that's quite important, a real commitment from the state, from civil society and the entrepreneurial world. And we cannot think about sustainable development without having this virtuous cycle. So this is not a static. If we see how it was understood before, from the center to the periphery, we said that developing countries have to move towards the world development goals. And then we understood that these sustainable goal problems were a problem that had to face as humanity as a whole. So we have a development agenda that has 17 points by 2030, the SDGs. And these are very important and necessary for sustainable development. We don't have to prioritize one on top of the other. We have to get to them all. But we get confused a little bit. And I believe that the focus on natural capital, which is part of what we're going to be talking about in this panel, this allows us to organize these ideas. It allows us to identify effectively that even though all these SDGs by 2030 are important, we have to also see that there's an order here. And here the SDGs have evolved as a concept. And we have a guideline where we say that even though all of them are important, the entire development of the society and economic growth is based in the biosphere, on our natural capital. And that's where the importance lies, on identifying what the possibilities are of making our natural capital part of the decision. And being part of this, it means that when we talk about economic growth and development, we're not just talking about the physical capital that countries have or the human capital, but also the natural capital, what nature provides us. These goods and services, they provide us natural resources, which are the stock of the natural resources, and the ecosystemic services it generates, which here in the auditorium, maybe we all know what we're talking about when I say that, and that these are part of the capital of a country, and it's important to account for them, measure them, and look after them, which has to do with the title of this panel. Now, the question is, how do we do this? And here I have some thoughts that I wanted to share with you. Maybe many more. This is a presentation doesn't necessarily represent the point of view of the Ministry of the Environment, but it is something that we're part of, and especially in the last few months, this avalanche of activities related to natural capital. Actually, last week, we had the Stanford University group visiting us in a joint work that we're doing for the next 3 years. You're going to hear about that a bit later. But with it, in these enabling thoughts, I want to mention these four: awareness, institutionality, information, and financing. In the panel, of course, we're going to see more, but I wanted to make some references here. First of all, awareness. To become aware of what we're talking about, of what we are setting as a challenge, and whether or not we're following the agenda. And this is very interesting, because in the International Economic Forum, we asked, what are your concerns for the next 10 years? 5 of the 10 most important ones have to deal with the environment. Actually, the first 4 have to do with the environment. Extreme weather events, loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse, lack of natural resources are problems that appear as urgent and that humanity is facing in the next 10 years. So, therefore, and here's the point of the awareness point, is how we're able to make nature visible in decision making. And as natural capital, I say that it provides us the tools to sit down and state how we can make nature part of the decision making process. And Rodrigo will talk about that more about the dependence rationale from the private sector towards the environmental aspects. As for institutionality, well, we have the climate change law, the mandate for climate law. We have an institutionality that's quite sound in environmental topics, which we know many times faces resistance by some actors. But lately, what's been happening with this topic is 2 things. The first is that we're implementing and designing the regulations for the implementation of biodiversity and protected area services. Many of you that are here participated over the 10 years of discussion that we had about this law. That's now a reality that has been approved, and we're now designing the regulations for it, and it's starting to be implemented in different regions. And second, the Natural Capital Committee, which is an interministerial instance made up of 3 different ministries with the technical assistance of the central bank. So the public institutionality and economic institutionality has placed and has put attention on this concept of natural capital. The Natural Capital Committee, I think, and I always like to highlight this, it burns from the previous government, from Sebastián Piñera's government, and it's become materialized in the President Boric's period. And this is then a state view more than a government kind of view, not policymakers. And Rodrigo Regalo was here, and now we say he was the first president of the Natural Capital Committee from the beginnings of this institutionality. And you can always ask him a lot of questions about this. Not only public institutionality, but also we have an ecosystem, I think, around the natural capital concept. I'll leave this here later for you to review, but I wanted to let you know that from the public world there are initiatives being born, financing for some projects is appearing from the private sector to implement this idea of focusing on this, and from then we can preserve and recover biodiversity. The other element that I think is key is the information aspect. Without information, we cannot make decisions. That's a fact. And I would like to highlight 2 initiatives here. The first one has to do with the implementation of the public baselines, which are, as it says, baselines that working as a country from Magellan to Antofagasta and the metropolitan region in the whole of Chile. And it's a source of information both for researchers and for civil society to recognize the state of natural capital in their region. I wanted to invite you to check that webpage with lots of information, and it'll be quite useful also for private decision making. It's not a regulatory information, but you can see things about biodiversity in your own region, and I guess companies can move forward with decision making. And we're also working with Stanford, as I was mentioning. We carried out a first pilot in Rio Bueno Basin with ecosystemic services. We're going to carry on working with them for the next 3 years, also going deeper into our knowledge, extending it to other regions of the country, and we think that that will also be a source of information to promote the focus of natural capital. And finally, in financing, we know that here we have a gap. We know what financing means for biodiversity. We know that biodiversity generates or depends 50% on biodiversity, so we're affecting growth directly when we don't look after biodiversity. We know that there's a deficit, a permanent deficit in terms of biodiversity financing. We know that there's a return that's 9 times higher than when we invest. For example, when we invest $1, we get $9 back. So it's not necessary, and it's quite intelligent and economically profitable to look after biodiversity. And I'm sorry to mention it in this way, but this is the perspective where I want to show you, knowing that it's not the only one. I'm saying this to make it clear that we actually acknowledge the intrinsic value of nature. Nobody is questioning, or nobody wants it to sell nature. It's measuring it, valuing, quantifying it. It doesn't have to do with being willing to sell it at whatever price. It's just to acknowledge it, to measure it, so we can sit down and talk about it. In this sense, it is possible to see this financing gap of over $711 billion a year, and we have to take charge of that. And how do we overcome that? The public and the private world have a lot to say. The private world, through their programs, I'm not going to talk about that part, but I think it's a positive nature. And on the public side, and we're coming to the end now of my presentation to tell you what we're working on right now from the public sector. Of course, public policies are our tool. Public policies that, of course, we have the carrot and the stick, whether it is possible or not to develop certain activities, and incentives. On regulations in particular, Law 2600 in Article 38 is a regulation for biodiversity compensations. This falls into the institutional circuit that's been regulated, and we have developed and was already approved by the Minister Council a regulation that states, among other things, the idea of zero net loss and net gain in biodiversity, of course, moving through the hierarchy of the impact and residual impact, and if it allows the goal of compensation so that there's a zero net loss and nature positive, which is something that has moved a lot in the biodiversity world. We hope for a compensation to be adequate so that it can be compensated in terms of the remaining. There's a goal where we measure actions, but not goals. So it's quite relevant in terms of conservation. And finally, the quantification of losses and gains. There's a system there that forces us to measure and report this. On the incentive side, we're working on 2 sets of regulations. The system of certification of biodiversity and ecosystemic services is the reason why I cannot sadly be there with you. I missed out on getting to know the woods. I have to go and present and defend this idea of this regulation later before the Council of Ministers. And if it's approved, what we will approve is basically this. So this is a sort of of highlight. So the certification system will have two mechanisms where the end goal will be the provision of a stamp, of a seal for biodiversity, and acknowledging external programs will also recognize standards that have to be approved that will create seals or biodiversity management units. And this management unit is a tool, economic tool, to gather resources and provide them to nature. These are transactionable ones, and they must be additional and permanent in time. And finally, the retribution contracts for ecosystemic services. We passed this 2 weeks ago in the Council of Ministers, and now it's moving towards the National Controller. And what does this mean? It means like the PCAs. On the one hand, we have the person or the part that provides a service, who makes sustainable use, restores, or preserves the ecosystems, and then generates ecosystemic services. And then you have the retribution party, which provides a retribution that could be money or something else. It could be, for example, technical expertise. This with the goal of keeping or recovering the ecosystemic services of a territory. So these three have been called economic tools, but these three instruments are the ones that have accompanied the creation and generation of the implementation of the biodiversity and protected area services that comes to complete the public institutionality and to complement also the paradigm of conservation, also with the paradigm of this natural capital approach. Not a replacement, but a complement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Very interesting presentation. And a spoiler of what's coming in the certification. We can see you now. It's a pleasure. I have a face, yes. So thank you very much. I hope you stay and listen coming presentations. In preparation for the panel, I would like to invite now Rodrigo Arriagada. He, as mentioned by Victor, was the first trainer of natural capital, associate professor in the Department of Ecosystem and Environmental Plan, Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. And he works in the Ecosystem and Environment Department, where he works on environmental economies, conservation policy, impact assessment, land use, and ecosystem services, integrating quantitative tools to analyze the social and ecological effects of public policies. He served as head of Information Environmental Economic Division of the Chilean Ministry of the Environment, contributing to the creation of the Natural Capital Committee. So we'll have the perspective of another representative of the academia, always needed to supplement the view of the matter. I'm going to stay over here because I would like to move. Hi, Victor. He always acknowledges my work, and it's good to be acknowledged because what he says, it's something to be proud of in terms of government policies, and hope the next administration continues this path, because this talks about political stability. Before we continue, I would like to thank Campus Naturaleza. I always enjoy being here. This is a very special university. Coming from the capital, Santiago, it's always a pleasure to be here and Christian and myself been working for many years together, and I'm going to talk on my behalf, but I think, Christian, I would reflect your words. I think now we can realize that nowadays the challenges of our society are very complex, and to think that only one discipline will be able to address them would be naive. All problems are difficult, and all disciplines are summoned to contribute to this matter. Even from my position as a teacher with scientific knowledge, the inclusion of other kinds of knowledge is very needed. I don't want to be disruptive. I'm going to present a matter that we haven't discussed, like I'm going to put another layer into the cake. But I hope you can follow my train of thought. Probably I'll present some uncomfortable questions, but let's see how it goes. I've been working in the university for over 16 years, plus my PhD in the States. And I have evolved myself, I have changed my perspective, and I have to acknowledge that going through public administration changed my way of thinking in many matters. And it's different, things are different when you participate, in the administration. Victor knows this better than no one, but being part of the government is very difficult to work on some matters, but we can make progress anyway. I don't want to alarm you, because these kind of speeches are not mobilizing, but to say that the planet is going to collapse if we do not change the way we behave, if I say that, I don't know the impact of my words, and insisting on that catastrophic vision, I think, is not the path. However, there are some data available, and it's good to set some basis for the discussion. Victor mentioned several of the things I wanted to say as well. The OCDE, we are part of the OCDE of developed countries in the world, and here we include the loss of biodiversity as one of the highest risks experienced by society, given the connection these risks have with other matters, and we are going to talk about that as well. This piece of data is mentioned a lot, the dependency of the world on nature. 44 trillion, that's lots of zeros. And what happens with the other half? It doesn't depend on nature. I would say 100% of the PIB depends on nature, directly, indirectly. Some dependencies are quite obvious, but I think that this is 100% dependent. We have 100% dependency, everything that we do. So it's good to mention that, but also to say that we need to keep the big picture in mind. We have talked a lot about the economic benefit of looking after the nature, business models related with botanic gardens. Alejandro talked about how difficult it was for him to collect 1,000 million pesos to keep the garden open. But if we talk about the value of economy, of course, our dependency has increased, regardless of the metric. Nowadays, we are doing better than in the past in terms of poverty progress, health progress, access to public infrastructure. We are doing better in many aspects. However, that growth that has allowed to double-fold the productive capital, technology, even human capital, comes with a cost. And what we are not good at is making that cost visible. So we are accomplishing many things, but we do not understand of the cost of it. If we get a benefit, what are the true costs behind all of these benefits? And I think we are not measuring this comprehensively. This metric, and Victor also showed it, if you look at the evolution of the capital we have produced, the history behind that, it's an important decrease of our natural capital. Victor stole this slide from me, so I'm not going to delve deeper on this, but this is the evolution. Here we are talking of the Global Economic Forum. This is not an environmental NGO, right? This is the World Economic Forum. In the short term, probably this is not so visible. We can see extreme weather events here. But if we start projecting this to the mid-long term, 10 years, let's say, nature has a very important role. I think this figure is very interesting and is part of the same report on global risks landscape. You can see here how risks are connected and interconnected. How these green nodes have to do with nature. In the upper part, we have biodiversity lost, natural resources shortages, extreme weather events, and you see how these risks connect with a decline in health and well-being and inequality, infectious diseases. We have proven in Chile that our protected areas are buffers for the transmission of zoonotic diseases transmitted through wild animals. So with this, you realize that the challenges at global level are complex challenges that are interconnected. Hence, the disciplines are summoned to work together. So that's a good way of interpreting where we are. If you have heard presidential debates, all candidates, regardless of the political party, all of them agree more or less in the same topics. Safety is a structural problem that needs to be approached, but all candidates say that the country needs to grow again. Economic growth looks like it's going to be the challenge for the next presidency. So that's a advancement because we agree on what needs to be done. Now, how are we going to do that? And now the responses are more diverse. How does a country measure its growth? Growth is measured through the GDP. That's the traditional measurement. And it's important to understand what the GDP actually measures. This was created to measure macroeconomic performance of a given economy with a long-term vision. That's the GDP. So it's important to measure the growth like this because you can correlate it with other variables related with well-being. For example, poverty. If we produce more and our macroeconomic performance looks good, then poverty will be positively impacted. So the GDP itself doesn't have any problem in the way it has been defined. The problem is when you start asking things to it and it was never designed for these matters. For example, delivering information about other dimensions. equity, for example, we can make the cake bigger, but how I'm going to divide the cake, that's a different thing. And environmental dimension is only one dimension that has not been captured well when we measure economic growth. So undoubtedly, we need to move towards different ways of measuring things. And natural capital would be one of the ways we could start measuring to make the role of nature more visible. Victor assumed we all knew about this, but when I was elaborating my presentation, I thought, like, what happens if, like, we don't know what natural stocks are? This is a concept that is a bit controversial. Natural stocks, it sounds weird. It's like mixing two terms that should not be mixed together. But what's natural stock? This has two components. We have the stocks, the stones, fish, trees, minerals, soil, water. These are stocks, right? Some are renewable, some do not renew, like minerals. So we can measure that stock. How much water do we have? Now, the natural stock approach says that from out of those stocks we get benefits that are the ecosystem benefits. Natural stock is a redefinition of nature, acknowledging in a modular way these different components. That has a strategy behind it, because with that I can talk about production functions. I can say, well, nature is an asset, and in my production that asset should be incorporated, measured, and valued. So it's a very convenient term to start measuring and counting nature in a way that is similar to the way we measure and count other kinds of stocks. We measure machines, human capital, how much money do we have. So we need to start, it makes us start thinking in nature this way. So for us, I have a PhD in economics, a pretty interesting mix in my own training. So in the end, natural stock is an extension of the capital theory. This is quite an old term. Now, my invitation is to think outside the box and change the paradigm. Why is it important to invest in nature? That could be an insult for an audience like this. How can you present that kind of question? But if I run a survey, why do we need to invest in nature? I'm pretty sure everyone would have a different answer. What about you, those who work and generate income? How many of you invest your money in an asset, in a given asset? Raise your hand, please. Do you invest your money in an asset? Less than 10%? And what about the rest? Do you save? That would be like the first step. If you are not saving money, you know that could become a problem. Maybe you are having fun, too much fun. So when we translate this to investment in nature, why would I have to think about this differently? The same thought should apply. And if we translate this to the private sector, all companies should invest in nature. Someone might ask, why? Why do companies need to invest in nature? So that speech needs to be improved. And that speech will improve as we gain knowledge in this connection. For many companies, investing in nature makes sense because companies depend on nature in a very specific and concrete way, in a way that can be measured and valued. They generate impacts as well that produces other kinds of problems, conflict with communities, social license to operate in given territories, for example. So investment in nature becomes something related with risk management, and companies are very good in managing risks. So this is a pretty evident connection that needs to be explained further. This is like homework, because probably I will spend my next 20 years trying to understand this scheme. I'm trying to connect biodiversity with financial stability, and there are many things in between we haven't fully understand. There are transmission channels, how a physical risk connected with nature transform into financial stability, how the tax rate could be affected by an extreme weather event. The connection is way too long, so this is an invitation to you all. This is what we're working on. So we've been gaining understanding nature and financial risk are connected. Activities have an impact and dependencies that can become opportunities, then risk can transform in opportunity. So to let you all know, we are launching a new initiative in University of Concepción. Is part of this, that is Natura Invest, a research center, an initiative that will work on finance. And Natura Invest wants to promote private investment in nature. Victor talked about the gaps in financing that are huge, and philanthropy is not enough. Governments are not enough because governments have different priorities. So this is a call for the private world to play an active role, better understanding how this is super necessary. We'll be working on this line, measure, valuing, counting, understanding how companies interact with nature, impacts and dependencies, risks and opportunities. This is a vehicle to promote investment, better understanding the relationships, creating markets, financial solutions. That's all part of the work we'll be performing in this Natura Invest. I'm very excited about this. 30 seconds and I'll be done. This is U21. This is a coalition of universities around the world. In this case, Universidad Católica, probably University of Concepción. We haven't talked about this yet, Christian, but we will. And it's a positive initiative. An international organization is trying to define metrics and standardize metrics to measure nature that can be used by companies. And the academia has been invited to test this, to measure what cannot be measured, because how can we measure nature? So this is the invitation. And well, this picture was taken in Campus Naturaleza. I just wanted to show it. That's part of my team. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. Very interesting, because in that picture you work on, that diagram you show, we see we are all part of it. We are all involved there. So we'll give you 1 year. In the next seminar, you need to present your progress about our role. Now I want to present the private sector that has been called to show their collaboration. So I would like to invite Patricio Herranz, Sustainability and Conservation Chief at CMPC, who will present a project and several ways in which CMPC has worked on conservation, and especially about the Patagonia project. So I'm going to give my presentation from here. So thank you, Campus Naturaleza. Thank you, University of Concepción, for inviting us to have this conversation. Thank you all for being here. And I'm going to provide a different perspective from, like, we have the academia, the public area, and I'm going to present the work we are doing at CMPC, where we decided to take on the decision of reorienting a project that we have in Patagonia, starting with the official assessment of the natural stocks of this patrimony. And based on that, we put together a roadmap, and now we are looking at which are the main ecosystem components that will generate value, given this project is becoming the big lab of CMPC, to learn, to get to know, to take all of this into account. I hope I get to know the results of that scheme Rodrigo just showed. How can we bring all of that to where we generate operations? How natural stocks can be valued? To give you a bit of context, we are a global company with more than 100 years of history. We have forests in 3 different countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, with different species, 1,300,000 hectares of patrimony, 31% of that patrimony, 400 and something hectares have been protected and preserved. Almost 99% of our patrimony in the 3 countries have a certification of forest management. 98% is FSC, but we also have PFC certification, and we have 468 high-value areas of conservation defined based on one of the 6 criteria used to define this. It was said why companies should preserve the environment or nature. For forestry people, this is natural because we depend on nature. And if we see this internally in the company, it's not the same for the forestry area than for the pulp area. You know, it's different. But for those who are in the forest area, we depend on all the elements of nature to operate and get the benefits. The upper part here is Coyhaique patrimony, 25,000 hectares, 113 plots distributed between Aysén and Ibáñez commune. The conservation and protection surface is 43% there. And nowadays we have this patrimony completely certified, and we have 10 areas of high value in this forest patrimony. So the origins of CMPC in Patagonia. In Patagonia, we had the largest fire in history of Chile. 3.5 million hectares burned to colonize the land. This is a picture of Grosse, father of Hans Grosse. He was the first in this area. This was the reality of Coyhaique, and over 1 million hectares nowadays are still in this condition, with problems to recover the wood, to remove it from there. But there is an extensive agriculture where this wood does not bother cows, so why making an effort in removing all of this? Back in the 80s, CMPC decided to start buying plots with a productive end, but also to understand how could we help control the effects of erosion in Aysén region. We received Fundo La Cabaña in the 90s. We bought it like this, and this is the last picture, 2023. It has been planted with ponderosa pines. These are the hills of the Hudson, where we had to take machines to remove 1 meter of ashes to plant, because plant would be hidden, where we had to remove all the ash from the volcano. In 2023, the company launched its strategy on conservation, biodiversity and nature. It was the first strategy that was approved by Snap for Future, that determined it contained all the basic elements to become nature strategies based in 4 pillars: biodiversity, solutions based on nature, ecosystemic services, and a very relevant pillar that is encompassing the other 3, that are the territories. The effects of CMPC over nature, individually, the value is 0 if we do not generate partnerships and increase of that effect that we want to achieve. So the territory factor means to go beyond the limits of our plot to found synergies with other stakeholders. We have discussed about all of this: ecosystem services, solutions based on nature. Before launching the strategy, we started thinking what to do with the project, Aysén project. In that region, we do not have ports to take the wood out. There is no productive infrastructure. To harvest the wood, we had to bring machines from the north and somehow bring it to the south. That was, we assessed all alternatives to sell the patrimony, divide the land into plots, touristic endeavors, but the company said we are going to keep patrimony and will transform it. And in 2023, in Gaiscop, we launched this formally. The Coyhaique patrimony will go to a conservation project. And how this project will be seen: out of the 23,000 hectares, 13,000 hectares were already part of conservation and protection areas. 4,500 hectares were worked and are being assessed to be cut to allow Lenga forest to start entering there, to achieve natural restoration of Lenga or Ñirre forest, depending on the place, by extracting pine plantations. And 8,000 hectares will be left as carbon sinks, especially those areas with plantation in slopes of 45 degrees. I was not there when they planted. I don't know how they do that in helicopters. I don't know, but there are plantations like this. We defined, okay, what are we going to do? What are the impacts to be, and what are the dependency in each of the plots? How much value of biodiversity we have in each of the plots?
And we defined where to start. 14 plots have the highest value. In these services or ecosystem elements that we defined in the study. Carbon, water, and we generated our roadmap, and our roadmap starts first by valuing carbon. The first graph here shows a carbon capture with 3 successive rotations of a forestry project, a traditional forestry project. The one at the bottom takes up a part, that's everything that we're generating because of restoration, the impact it has, and the other one is the accumulation per life year of the plantation in the carbon sinks. So in a first simulation, we're talking about moving from 2 million tons of carbon to 7 million tons of carbon that will be left there permanently. And then the thinning. The part in blue is a pilot program we ran in 2023 of 18 hectares. The dark green is native forests in that plot, and the blue one is body of water. The light green are pine plantations. And what looks like in the gray area, it's image analysis to determine where native forest has already been recovered. So the operational thinning is going to be the light green area and manually be done in the already marked areas. And that way, the native forest will take on its place. These 18 hectares that were thinned out, we turned in a set of tests and researches with lenga enriching, with notro, with natural generation, and we've been measuring it to see the effect in the increase of the surface. Another one of the components on biodiversity is biodiversity. Fauna in this case. We are part, or we want, and we're asking formally to the regional government to be part of the group that organizes the Huemul Trail in the area, because we have parts of forest and we have high value areas that have measurements since 2018 with trap cameras. So we have a history of information and images. We're adjoining the Zorro Castillo Park to the north, and we're neighbors of the Trapananda National Park that's also associated with the Huemul deer. So we want to be an important actor. Next to Zorro Castillo area, we have a surface area of around 1,200 hectares. Another one of the ecosystemic services or components that are important is erosion. As you can see in this image, the two that are in color are CMPC plots. In the middle, there's a neighbor, one from a neighbor, and that is the reality of the erosion and soil damage that there is now on not having a vegetal cover. We have native forests on the top and plantations at the bottom. But the sole fact of having had a vegetal cover, we know, but here we're seeing it, and there's a thesis that was made by university student that showed the organic matter content in 3 of our plots plus the Mañiguelas Reserve in areas with and without plantations, and to see the impact of the vegetal cover. Now this can be taken to a public policy that aims at territorial agricultural ordaining. They have over 1 million hectares in these conditions in Aysén, which are not covered with anything. Well, human well-being. How do we tie this together? The company has a company called Living Forest. It's 4 parks that were open to the community so that they can enjoy nature for recreation purposes, and also see the relationship between plantations and native forests. There are 3, one in Angol, one in Temuco, one in Loncocha, and the 4th one was opened last year in El Cóndor in Coyhaique, 10 kilometers away from the city of Coyhaique. And we see how many visitors we've had. from January to October, we've had 10,150, up to September, 10,150 people who have gone into these parks. So there are 2 bicycle paths, there's trekking trails, there's a viewpoint in Cerro Negro, it's part of the point. We have plantations that live together with the forest. We have a monitoring system with trap cameras. There's environmental monitoring because it includes the school outreach program that started in 2008, and in 2016 we started working with SECAR, which is an outreach center, where we designed something that means that we investigate the contents of 6th graders, and we see the model of hands-on work. So the children go there to the center. Then during the pandemic, this was done online. Then we came back to school and then back to the center, and now we're at the park. And here they learn about erosion, traffic change, but by doing things, by making things, they know the horizons, they know how to build, how to make the soil work, and understand this. From 2016 to 2024, we've had an average of 1,000 6th graders from the communes of Ibáñez, Coyhaique, and Aysén. 90-something% of the 6th grade classes go through this program. We lowered down in 2019 because of the pandemic, but we've had a pretty good upkeep with the company and the teachers who have in their diaries written down the dates where you can enroll, and they become a very important metric for us. Water, as another service, we have 6 water catchment areas where more than 2,000 people use water that comes or goes through one of our plots. We have the Mayewan Villa that takes up water from our catchment area. And lessons that we've learned. It's a challenge, but it creates a different value and point of view on how to create value for the company. Both value different from traditional production, as Rodrigo was saying, how we know today how much native forest is worth maybe in cubic meters. But the value of the landscape is very different from the cubic meter measurement. How do we value that landscape, that environmental component, and we keep it as part of our nature conservation and biodiversity initiative? That'll be it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting project that you've shown us, and the challenges that CMPC has faced along these years. I would like to invite our final speaker so that we can move to the panel. So write down any questions that might arise. I am inviting now Ezequiel Muniz, who is the marketing manager of Natura Chile. He's now in a country since 2023 and has been working in the company for over 11 years. For those of you who don't know the work of Natura in terms of sustainability, actually Natura is a leader company in the incorporation of biodiversity and sustainability aspects and at the center of their business in decision making, and the trajectory that both the organization and Ezequiel have leading the area that he's leading, marketing and sustainability, and how to incorporate protection and safeguard, and also here how to value nature as it should, as an example that we should consider and have the privilege to know. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to you. Good afternoon, how are you? Can you hear me? Good. So as Rodrigo, I will move, and actually worse because I'm even more restless. So thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you all for being here today with us. Thank you to the authorities. I was saying before, the way in which we have been treated and welcomed has been really nice. today I have several challenges. First of all, having only 20 minutes to tell this story, which is the challenge we've all faced so far. And the second one, and I think the biggest one, is that I am the first marketing person that has to take the floor. We've seen specialists, professors, people from the academia, people from companies with a environmental background or engineering background, etc. And in my case, I come from the marketing area. I studied marketing. I have an MBA in finances. I studied growth marketing. And when I discovered along my career path that I wanted to do maybe what you think is like, oh, the cold marketing guy that only wants to sell something, I also wanted to have the chance of, maybe you're gonna laugh because yeah, you have that prejudice. I wanted to have the choice of learning something that I would be proud of. So maybe when they said it's the marketing manager and I'm gonna sell you the story of Natura, well, bad news, yes, I will want to sell it to you because it's part of my nature, but it's because of how passionate I am for a brand that, as Constanza said, has made history for many years. So we'll begin and I'll let you know a little bit more about the story. Natura is a Brazilian company that starts in 1969. It's over 50 years old. It's the first market that came into the Brazilian market. Chile was the first country where we went into. So your country is something that's very important to us. It's very close to our heart. And our biggest claim or catchphrase that we use is good well-being. Have you listened to that? Heard that in an ad? So what is good well-being? Is well-being, which is our harmonious relationship between one and oneself, and to be good is to be good with each other. And today, it's not an innovative thing, but imagine a cosmetics brand over 50 years ago that starts talking about these topics, that starts talking about feeling good with one's body. When the cosmetic industry for many years built these stereotypical images that are very different, or feeling good about the environment. That's why Natura was the first world company on releasing refills or creating a business model that can be generative. So Ecos, who has used Natura chestnut cream, hand cream? All of you, well, good indicator. Well, the chestnut hand cream, I will let you know a bit more about that, is our first 100% regenerative product. And I will tell you a bit more about that. But first, I wanted to tell you about our motto, which is that our business is focused on people. Also, think about a company, a leading company in cosmetics in Latin America. We're the most sold cosmetic company in Chile, Brazil, and other Latin American countries. Just think how different it is from what we think companies say they do. What is this possibility of thinking on people first? And when we talk about people, we talk about real people. Maria is a woman who is part of one of our communities that actually harvest chestnuts in the Amazon. And over 25 years ago, we developed a model that allows us to keep the Amazon standing. So people like Maria make me emotional because these are real people. I mean, I've met Maria, I've met her family, I met her surroundings, and the possibility she has through Natura, our company, to develop a business model for her family and for her community as a whole. So Maria is part of this harvesting network. Over 10,000 families are part of the history of Ecos. Do you know this product, any of you? Well, this is one of our best sellers in Chile. Not only does it have the possibility of being used with regenerative bioactives, but also it's 100% of the plastic has been or will be recycled after used. So when you buy this kind of product, you buy a product that not only removes residues from the context of rivers, but also promotes regenerative economy of the Amazon. So a phrase that I love is we transform challenges that are socio-environmental in nature into business opportunities. What does this mean? It's the chance of developing through the Amazon a business that can actually grow daily. And something that we always say is that sustainability is not enough anymore. Why do we say this? Because today we're talking about a new concept, which is regeneration. Have you heard of that? We listened to the term earlier, which is the possibility of generating businesses that, from the essence of the business, moves forward and promotes businesses that protect the environment and put society in the center of the decision-making process. So, how are we doing so far? Are we doing all right? Here, this image, I like bringing it forward because it's a possibility of visually understanding the difference between a sustainability rationale as we know it today to a rationale of regeneration. And what is the message here of this slide? Or what I want to convey to you? Of moving away a little bit from sustainability as the possibility of compensating our footprint to regeneration, which is the possibility of regenerating relationships such as nature has taught us that are present and that we have to recover. And one of the keys that Rodrigo mentioned is measurement. And Rodrigo, you gave me an example that's key, which is the GDP. And I wanted to ask you, who of you here came on foot? Who came on a bicycle? Who came by car on their own? Some of us came by plane. Who do you think will add more to the GDP according to the traditional indicators for economy? The one that came by plane. So what Rodrigo was mentioning, and I like using this metric, is part of this need we have as organizations to change the indicators that rule our daily lives and lead decision making in companies. Because for whoever who has been in a company and knows more about the financial indicators, have heard about the P&L or the result chart. Anybody study that at university, a results chart? Basically, is what comes in from sales minus the costs of the product, the costs of the organization, and then you have the final line that for the financial people and for those who work in decision making, for example, what the CEO says is like, I want to go to the bottom line. What happens there? These result charts do not reflect today the entire story that they have to tell. Natura, in this case, and all the indicators that we have to contemplate, as Rodrigo said, from a broader point of view of business. So, what did we do? We developed a new model of measurement, which is called IPNL. IPNL measures three big elements: natural stock, human capital, and social capital. As I said before, we have a big challenge ahead of us, which is showing in a company a different way of doing things. And for a company to work, we have to be profitable. And that is very important. Many times when we are in the sustainability world, and I said that Rodrigo mentioned it somehow, or one of the previous speakers did, you say, you know what? No, profitability and sustainability cannot go together, hand in hand. So, human capital, that's where we have each of the indicators that are linked to salaries, to dividends of the company, to remunerations, to training, to diversity and inclusion. Natural stock, where we have climate change, we have the measurements for pollution, for the use of the soil, of the forest. Forest for us is the rainforest, and what does it mean for us? It's the possibility that through business to develop models that allow the rainforest to stand. And what does this mean? El Ucuba, which is an active principle that we use in one of our creams, was a tree that was threatened with extinction, and thanks to the work done by Natura and the indigenous communities, we achieved for this tree to leave that threatened area, and we had the possibility of showing the world that there are different ways of doing business that are not only sustainable but also regenerative. We have natural stock and we have social capital. This proposal of IPNL is not an invention by Natura. It's not something Natura said, you know what, we're going to create a completely new methodology. It is just the possibility of joining together different things that speakers throughout the day and you have studied or have seen along, well, today, and from your career paths and from your challenges. Here you can see the methodologies that we use and the organizations that accompany us in this challenge. Just think about the challenge that an organization that is part of the stock market there. Who would invest in that? Who invests in the stock market here? Around here? What do you see? What do you see when you invest? Profitability. The value of the stock, of its share, but nothing more. It's the opportunity to show businesses a different way of doing things. And the natural stock itself, which is what brings us together today, is the possibility of talking about several very important topics. One of them is the neutral carbon program. Natura is carbon neutral since 2007. That's a long time ago. But we did not stay with that alone because we have the challenge of being by 2030 net zero. Net zero means reducing as much as possible all our emissions and achieving that way in scopes 1 and 2 up to 90% and scope 3 to compensate them, but also to start measuring things that are not measured in the industry today. For example, any of you uses Instagram? Yeah, all of you. Do you think that any of the companies actually measure their carbon footprints of the materials that they post online on social networks? Do you believe that happens or not? No. Today, most companies do not measure that footprint, which is one, consume some kind of materials, and the other one's consuming energy to see the material that from a marketing point of view have created to sell a product. So since last year, we have been measuring the footprint, the carbon footprints of our posts on social networks. And also in this way, we started compensating that impact. Here, I ask you if you want to scan the QR code and see the PDF that explains in detail the way in which we work the natural stock. How long do I have left? Okay, I have 5 minutes. And I wanted to give you some more examples. Let's see if this is actually working. See if can you help me over there, if you can move to the next slide. Okay, here we are. This is an example that for me is something that makes me really proud, because you know that palm oil is one of the most controversial ingredients in the cosmetic industry. Do you know why? Because of the monocultivation. Natura developed the first agroforestry palm tree oil projects, which have the ability of emulating what nature does at a large scale, of seeing the relationships and interrelationship between plants, insects, living beings that live there. These are agroforestry projects that allows us to have palm oil that comes from sustainable sources and also regenerative sources. Another slide, please. Another example here. Does anybody know this product? This is a newer product. Over here. Did you try it? So, what is the challenge that we face with this product? Did you see the product I showed you before? The pump, they call it the 400 ml pump. We turned it into this. Why? The possibility of, in one bottle of 30 ml, we can have the product at home and dilute it in water, and in that way transform it into the product that you already know. So how is this convenient for the user? First of all, if we reduce in 80% the use of plastics from the big bottle to this little bottle. We reduced 85% of the carbon emissions of transportation, because think that we're not transporting water. Water transportation is one of the biggest inefficiencies in the cosmetics industry, because basically water, well, of course we don't know, we know that there's no water everywhere, but moving water brings a big carbon footprint because of its weight and the challenge that we have to move water, but here we are generating concentrates. So another slide, please. What I want to show you, well, I'll tell you a little bit of what this is. Okay, so we can stop it there. This is an example where we were able to map the Amazonian diversity in Brazil, achieving in this way mapping not only the hectares but also the wealth of each one of these hectares. Today, thanks to the sales of ecos that happens in every country where Natura operates, we have been able to protect over 2.2 million hectares. 2.2 million hectares is a lot of land. If we compare it with the size of Concepción, it's almost 100 Concepción as a city. So what is the challenge here? Because so far what I told you, well, it looks great for Natura and it looks like it's a perfect path, but the challenge is now how to make this story to be bought by other companies. Natura alone will not save the world, same as each one of us on our own will not save the world either. So we need to broaden awareness, to provoke point of view, to not only add new companies to generate regenerative models, but also to propose new ways of measuring what business success is. So with that, I told you the story, and now we stay for the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting presentations, different perspectives to face the same challenge. And if you want to present a question, you can scan the QR code. We'll have a first question to begin the conversation. Victor, are you connected? Yes. From Rudy Barriga. She asks about something we know. Chile is a small contributor to greenhouse gases compared to big international powers. And the global impact that Chile can generate is not so big. But how can we become an international reference on climate action from Chile and the different places we live, and how nations with low emissions can generate a high positive impact through ethical or moral leadership? And Victor, I would like to have your view. Thank you. Because this is a frequent question. If you rank the countries that generate the most emissions, we are among the ones that generate less emissions. We are a small country, but I think the question also has the answer embedded in it, the idea that we can become a referent, and we are. The Natural Stock Committee is a referent followed closely by many countries around the world given its position, since it presents a matter that is relevant for the development of the country, but also because of the people who compose this committee. In other places where this institution exists, the composition is quite different. So there are many answers to this question. We are a referent in terms of institutional vision, in terms of biodiversity conservation. We are incorporating these 3 regulations that are quite from frontier. We are adjusting experiences from abroad, but we are also creating. When we incorporate economic instruments for the conservation of nature, we are also inventing how this should function, adapting international experience to Chile. So I think this is a good piece of news. The general framework of this is that all countries, regardless of their contribution level, we are accountable. Not only with nature, but in Chile, this is a complex task we all have to work on. And this is given the combination of the question, like what happens with greenhouse gases. We were the first country in the region that established a green tax, a carbon tax. And one of the challenges that we have as country is to connect this closer with the offset of carbon. Explain in one phrase, there are a group of companies that have to pay a tax for their greenhouse gases emission and local contaminants, and there is a group of projects, green projects, that capture or that generate energy from these sources and pollute less. That gives you bonds that are certified by a standard that nowadays international standard. There are 5 approved by the ministry, and you create a credit that is sold to the company that is obliged to pay the tax. With that, the company not on one hand generates offset, and on the other hand it reduces tax. There are many companies that have incorporated to this In the first year, Rodrigo worked on the implementation of the first stage. 260,000 tons were offset, and this year 4.5 million tons. And if we think that this idea of the polycrisis is made up of these three elements, it becomes clear that when we apply solutions of this nature that are a reference for practices in other jurisdictions of the carbon world, we can be sealing models that can serve as institutional models for other institutions. So that's about reaching the market with solutions that preserve nature while reducing greenhouse gases emissions, affecting biodiversity and population because they are the ones who are in situ. So from your position, you mentioned your goals of carbon neutral, of being carbon neutral, and I want to connect this with something that you all mentioned, that is the collaboration matters, that things cannot be done on our own. We are a small country, but what's the impact we can have on things? Well, I think that there are 2 or 3 points to address this question. Beyond the fact that we are a small country, when we see the balance of the planet, Chile, compared to other countries, we managed to consume the resources that we have for the entire year before other countries do. So we have a challenge there, because that's something to reflect upon. But there's also something very good about Chile, and I always acknowledge this every time I travel. That is the ecosystem and the relationships in Chile. I do not see them abroad. The space you are generating here in the University of Concepción of mixing the academia with the private sector is an example. Last week I participated in an event that was about marketing and sustainability and media. That is TV channels, networks, and I haven't experienced that in other countries. That's something very powerful. And to connect this idea with what you mentioned, how we measure ourselves, this is something we have included in our goals. Carbon as part of our decision-making process. So in Chile, when it comes to making decisions as in charge of marketing and sustainability, if we run out of a product, what does a company do? Well, other companies bring it by plane. But what's the challenge of that? Well, carbon footprint. As I have indicators in my goals, market share, of course, that is the share of the market we represent, but I also have carbon as part of my goals. All my decisions are tied to these 2 indicators. As a marketing person, I cannot make the decision of bringing products by plane without taking into consideration that I'm affecting the organization, because carbon is part of one of our indicators. So to complement what Victor was saying, we have the challenge of including in our goals in the private and public sector, especially, to include this confluence and this association of both variables, profitability with sustainability or regeneration. Thank you. Before we continue with the panel, we have to leave Victor. He has to go and defend his certification. So thank you. I think we'll have the results at 5 o'clock. It would be a good news for everyone. Thank you. And a question for Patricio by Ignacio Leal. In the programs you showed, have you explored plantation schemes different from monocultivars of exotic species? Have you implemented or assessed mixed plantations with native species? everything we are doing in Patagonia will have this view. We'll work with different methodologies to create value to the soil and the services provided. Work in changing methodologies in some cases are related with protection areas. We have changed the methodology of plantations. Agroforestry is a matter that is beginning in Coyhaique because the people who have cattle there have a lot of cattle, but we are using a methodology in Coyhaique specifically that has a virtual relationship for both. I open the fields, the farms with a small fee, and you help me protect it because the investment in the south is very big, so we become partners. Or that person looks after their grass for their cattle and then prevent wood stealing, for example, or a fire hazard. We communicate, so there is a virtuous relationship. It's not agroforestry as such, but it's a matter of associating with neighbors. Rodrigo, we have a question for you. Rudy says that in 10 years, the main 4 risks of the World Economic Forum relate with nature. But if we look at the projection in 2 years, the intensity of concern related with nature decreases. What do you think is the leaders think about nature crisis in the short, mid, and long term? And I'm going to connect that question with the matter that there is a challenge in matters of nature to cascade that concept to different company sectors. You belong to companies that are highly connected with nature, but there are other companies further away, like finance, banking, that are difficult concepts for them. So what do you think about this challenge to include them in the conversation? Well, the first part of the answer would have to do with human behavior. We have interesting research about why people are not saving. Because we are not good at it. And those studies are labs where you project yourself in 20, 30 years in time. And they transform you. You can see a picture of yourself in 20, 30 more years, and you do not know that person. Why would I save for this person? So we are very, very bad at planning in the long term. Short-term planning is something that is very important and paramount in decision-making processes. Companies are concerned about the first quarter, second quarter, like in a same year. They do not project themselves beyond that. State or governments also have problems with this view. So I think here we have to work from the base on. Even when we talk about why to educate children in finance, for example, my 10-year-old daughter, I teach these kind of things. Why does she have to save money? I think this has a lot to do with that. Interest rates, when you assess a project, you include interest rate. If my benefit is going to be seen in 10, 20, 30 more years, if I apply an interest rate to a horizon of that length, I won't be able to do anything because brought to current value would be too high. So you end up sacrificing one thing for the other. The role of the banking institutions is the challenge. The language needs to be changed. to make it more approachable to them, we have to assess the connection between assessment, risk, because banks are good to manage risk. Why don't we talk about risk management then? So there is a multi-level thing that will take a while, but I think we have to start somewhere. Sometimes the first step is the most difficult one. Someone in the audience? Ezequiel? So the drone image was quite interesting to me. What about the percentage left on the trees? Because the drone is to assess the amount of raw material that can be captured. Your name, Paula. Pleasure. We use the drone to map big surfaces. Then with AI, we interpret that data and transform them into this bigger mapping of the biodiversity asset. It's a surface that cannot be covered and could not be done in a different way. But the picking of the fruit is done by hand. The communities use ancient by moving trees, the chestnut falls to the ground, and that's how they collect the fruits. They use some specific machines, but drones are just to map. Any other question? Thank you for your presentation, because somehow you highlight a problem that is this tendency to postpone the current problems to address them in the future. And the experiences you have explained and the experience we are undergoing as a university, we are concerned about the future. And we don't want others to be responsible for the problems we are generating. And from that perspective, your presentations are very interesting, because somehow public policies, instruments that have been mentioned, want to correct that behavior through these different instruments. And we are at the same time as agents of change. We are being accountable for the problems we have as society. So from that viewpoint, your presentations are very relevant. And I would like to know Ezequiel's experience. Many of the decisions made nowadays that have to do with nature are not enough. In the long term, they generate a loss of value that exceeds the cost of facing these problems. And from that perspective, I am very interested in your experience from Natura of trying to measure this. And you mentioned the impact on profits. Have you measured this impact? What about value recovery through the strategies you have implemented? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Just by having a different kind of business, we need the development of different indicators. So profitability is not the one indicator, but we do have indicators related with loyalty of our consumers, We know how the brand has grown in the past years. We know that 8 out of 10 Chilean consumers, and in the region is more or less the same figure, take into account sustainability matters or that the brand has a positive impact. 3 out of 10 consumers also are willing to spend more money, to invest more. So there are long-term decisions. Maybe it's more economic to buy the palm trees from traditional systems. Profitability is built from the brand construction and from the chance of attracting consumers and what consumers are willing to invest for this kind of decisions. And then loyalty is built through spares. The possibility to buy spares is giving the consumer the chance to become more loyal to the brand because they bought it once and then they buy the refill. And that is something we are trying to promote here in Chile, and we're working on a pilot with the university and with the ISPs to promote the fractioning in stores that is not allowed yet for the cosmetic industry. So in terms of profit, of course, their impact in buying organic ingredients or working with agroforestry techniques, but we offset that and recover that profitability to have very good profitability levels compared with other companies at EBITDA level, thanks to the possibility of having built a strong brand in Latin America. And I have one question for Patricio from Phyllis Steps.
Have you thought about setting up restoration projects such as the one in Patagonia here in regions such as the Biobío, thinking about the protection of water, of creating biological corridors, actions that allows us to have a better balance with the landscape? Well, for a couple of years we have been working in the biological corridor of, well, I like to call it connection, ecological connection more than corridor, but it's a semantic issue, of RIL. We aligned everything that it got to the RIL reservation that has integrated with the municipality, with the agricultural regional secretariat, and Arauco, plus a private company to join the entirety of the corridor on the other side and leave the reservation protected, which is 14 hectares, where we have the real dispersion area. Today we're doing a preventive forestry project because it would be horrible for it to get burnt. We're also working in the biological corridor of Pitao, here in a set of plots that are between Araucanía and Biobío regions. Associated to Pitao, the gorges, we have the longest corridor in Chile. For a single species, we're talking about a total of 800 and something hectares, of which 500 will move from being productive to be part to this corridor to protect native species. We're inviting CONAF. I was yesterday with them from the 9th region to see and open that connection towards a little plot, because this is from our plot. We're designing some type of systems on Trongol, the definition of projects for priority areas to see how we can do things. But yes, we are working on them. There's a strong work in the preventive infrastructure, particularly related to the forestry interface, the human forestry interface, where we create 3 corridors facing the interface where we have facilities that reach 100 meters, where the first part of mineral soil, the second part is non-vegetation, and the third one is with thinning out of trees, so the intensity of the fire and its speed of the fire does not reach it. And that is in every plot of ours that has rated with a house or a warehouse or some other human settlement. That is also something that we're carrying at an industry facility level. And also at high preservation value areas. We are working on this, but we also want to create other ways of giving value to them, and that is how this turns into our lab with all this new information that we're getting with ecosystemic systems, services, or etc. We knew that they were there, but Rodrigo was saying it, we couldn't measure it. It wasn't there in my accounting. It's zero for my accounting. Water exists, but today we have 55,000 people who drink water from a catchment in one of our plots. I don't have to value everything, because valuing is not monetizing, and that's a very different thing, because I have to put a value to it, because that value will mean that when I face a risk, I can add more of an effort to avoid something happening to it, because if I don't know how much something is worth, it might be just one family or the entirety of a town. But in the end, it's a service that forest provides. Of course, nobody wants to pay for nature. We know that. But at least we can make decisions, informed decisions, when you want to carry out an operation. For example, saying, you know what, I'm going to stop planting pines here and I'm going to put native trees. I need to know how much I win on making native, because I know how much I will make if it were pines, and we haven't sized that. And that's a great value that natural stock has, that it allows you to make informed decisions and see other assets of the company. It's very interesting. I think in the end we're trying to see how we mix valuing with different points of view, and that is attractive, because I think I said it at the beginning, here we're innovating also. We are creating, there's not a formula or a way of doing things. And I will give the floor to Rodrigo so that we can close the panel. A little bit about how you see the future here, how to get to certain consensus in points of view, in ways of seeing things, because you mentioned things that it's not very difficult to look into the future, not short term all the time. There's a company that I cannot mention that says that's fighting against short term decisions, and how the speeds and decisions of the planet also infer. And these initiatives by companies that also involve several actors, because we see that everybody has involved the communities, the academia. So how do you see that possibility of getting there? Well, people in academia have a lot more time to think. And I've thought about this a lot. 2 days ago, I was interviewed by CNN. I'll let you know, by the way, on the 22nd of October, a news story about Capital Natura will be broadcast in the Elise's show in CNN, Chile. And Paloma Vela was telling me that, no, we have to change the development model. And I just thought about it for a while. And I think not. If I never make the exercise and say, you know what, I'll start tomorrow, I will not sign up to run a marathon straight away, because I'll maybe finish last. I will not finish maybe, and I'll say, you know what, I'll never do exercise ever again. So if I start exercising tomorrow, maybe if I walk half a block or maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever, maybe on the second day I will be able to walk a bit more, and maybe at some point I will be able to run a marathon. So in these things, small steps are useful. We're not going to change the way in which the world thinks, or change the world that the model the world has, or making different decisions. We will not do that. Humans are not meant to be working that way. So here there's lots of young people. This is a university. And these are topics that actually mobilize students. Sometimes students want to... Yeah, right? Yeah, you're laughing at it. Yeah. Why is it so slow, you say? But calm down. Relax. The first step is always the hardest one to take. And we will not be able to change everything from one day to the next. Let's believe in small steps, in baby steps, little alliances. thinking long term will take a while. We have to start understanding that what I do today will have a consequence tomorrow. And this procrastination linked to the environment is a good example of it. So my invitation is to see the world in a positive light. The world will not end. If you think about it, the planet will stay here. The ones that are going to have a bad time is us, people. The planet will carry on. It'll accommodate. It's part of the natural evolution. The ones that will suffer it is us. So I think that the call here is to be reflective. Maybe a factor of change. We can do little things that contribute. Let's not think about the biggest global solutions. That doesn't exist. Global change is a global problem that will be solved with very small solutions. Here we have a very good example of it. So that's my invitation, particularly for future generations. And Christian, here we have a big challenge on how to train new professionals as well. I come from the economic side, and these are topics that are not talked about, like business managers leave university not knowing what this is, and they will make big decisions, important decisions in the future, and there we have a challenge in the training of people. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here today. It's been a very interesting panel. I have to mention Acción Empresa because we are in this, we believe in this, we think that these connections have to be made, and we believe the companies can contribute to sustainability, both internal and to the outside. So, well, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate the panel, and please let's take a picture. And we have a little present for you. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the moderator as well, Mrs. Constanza Pantaleon Segovia, for this presentation. And of course, we have now the time to take a picture and to hand out a little present to our speakers. Andrea Fernandez Covarrubia, Dr. Andrea Fernandez Covarrubia, welcome, Subdirector of the Campus Naturaleza in University of Concepción, to give you a little present. First to the moderator. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to her. To Constanza Pantaleon. Next to Patricio Herens, Head of Sustainability and Conservation of CMPC. To Ezequiel Morris, Marketing Manager and Sustainability Manager in Natura Chile. And to Rodrigo Arriagada, also. Thank you very much. Of course, we're now inviting the Vice Director of Economic and Administrative Area of our university and the Director of Campus Naturaleza. I would like to thank the participation of all of you who have been here with us in this first day of the forum. We would like to finish now this day with these words. We would like to invite you to share a bit of coffee that's outside and to meet again tomorrow in our next day to delve into the links between biodiversity preservation and human well-being. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.